My sister spent 7 months convincing our entire family she was dying of cancer, and I found out at 2 in the morning in a hospital waiting room from a routine text about her sinus appointment. I was sitting in a hospital waiting room at 2 in the morning, still in the clothes I had worn to work that day, holding a cup of coffee I hadn't touched, when my phone buzzed with a text from my sister's doctor asking me to confirm her next appointment. That's how I found out. Not dramatically. Not with a confrontation or a confession. Just a text from a physician's office that didn't match any of the doctors she had told us she was seeing, sent to me because I was listed as her emergency contact, asking about a routine checkup for a completely ordinary condition that had nothing to do with the cancer she had spent 7 months telling our entire family was killing her. I read that text 3 times in that fluorescent waiting room with my mother asleep in the chair next to me and my father pacing somewhere down the hall, and the floor dropped out from under me so completely that I just sat there with the coffee going cold and my hands completely still and something inside me rearranging itself into a shape I didn't recognize. She didn't have cancer. She never had cancer. 7 months. My family had lived inside a nightmare for 7 months because my sister, Layla, 31 years old, intelligent, charming, the kind of woman who could make an entire room feel like it was exactly where it wanted to be, had decided to tell us she was dying. And we believed her. Every single one of us believed her without question because she was our family, and you don't question something like that. You don't sit across from your sister at the kitchen table while she's describing her diagnosis and think, let me verify this. You don't ask for documentation when the person you grew up with, the person you shared a bedroom with until you were 12, the person who called you from a parking lot once because she was scared and needed to hear your voice, tells you she has stage 3 lymphoma. You just believe her. You hold her hand. You cancel plans. You rearrange your life. You do all of it without hesitation because that is what love does. That is what she counted on. Let me tell you who Layla was before this, because the before matters. She was the funny one. The one who could diffuse any tension in any room with a single sentence. Growing up, she was the sister who snuck into my room when I was upset and didn't say anything, just sat with me, and somehow that was enough. She had struggled, genuinely struggled, over the years. A bad relationship in her late 20s that left marks she never fully talked about. Some financial instability. A career that had never quite solidified the way she wanted it to. She had always needed more reassurance than most people, more check-ins, more proof that she was loved and central and important. We gave her that freely because we loved her and because she was our Layla and because we didn't see any of it as a burden. I'm telling you this not to excuse what she did. Nothing excuses what she did. I'm telling you this so you understand that the ground was always there, the need for attention, the fear of being peripheral, the hunger for being the most important person in a room. We just never imagined she would build something this monstrous on top of it. The diagnosis, the fake one, came in the form of a phone call on a Wednesday afternoon in March. I was at my desk. She called and she was crying, not dramatically, just quietly, which made it worse, and she said she had been to the doctor and they had found something and she needed to tell me before she told Mom. She said lymphoma. She said stage 3. She said the doctors were optimistic but that it was serious. I remember closing my laptop and just sitting in the silence of my office for a few seconds, and then I said, okay, I'm coming over. I didn't ask questions. I didn't say, which doctor, which hospital, show me the paperwork. I grabbed my keys and drove to her apartment and held my sister on her couch while she cried, and I told her we were going to get through this. That was the first domino. Telling our parents was the second. Our mother, who had already lost her own mother to cancer, who carried that grief like a stone in her chest even 15 years later, sat down at her kitchen table when we told her, and went a particular shade of white that I had never seen on her face before. Our father, who is not a man who shows emotion easily, stood at the kitchen window for a long time without turning around. We sat there, the 4 of us, in the house I grew up in, and the fear was so thick and so real and so completely manufactured by my sister's imagination that I feel physically sick thinking about it now. And then Layla cried. And my mother held her. And my father came and put his hand on her shoulder. And I sat across from them and watched my family close around my sister like a wound trying to heal, all that love, all that fear, all of it completely real on our end and completely performed on hers. The months that followed were a masterclass in manipulation that I still can't fully process. She was consistent in a way that should have impressed me if it hadn't been so evil. She had doctors' names. She had the names of medications. She looked things up, she had to have looked things up, because the details were specific enough that none of us thought to question them. She talked about side effects with the right language. She lost some weight, I don't know how deliberately, but enough that it was visible. She was tired at the right times. She canceled plans in patterns that felt medically plausible. My mother drove her to appointments. Or she thought she did. She would drop Layla outside a medical building and Layla would go in and my mother would wait in the car or go get coffee and come back and Layla would come out looking drained. I found out later she was sitting in building lobbies or walking around inside and then coming back out. She was using the hour to do what? I don't know. Sit somewhere quiet. Be alone with what she was doing. I try not to think about what was going through her mind in those hours. I canceled a work trip I had been planning for 8 months. A conference that mattered professionally, one I had been preparing for and had real reasons to attend. I canceled it without blinking because my sister was sick and my family needed me close. My mother stopped going to her book club, stopped seeing her friends with any regularity, started centering every week around Layla's schedule. My father, who had a mild heart condition already, started having more frequent episodes of elevated blood pressure that his doctor flagged as stress-related. We were all quietly falling apart in service of a lie. I noticed things, small things, and I talked myself out of every single one of them. There were times Layla seemed too well, too energetic, laughing too easily for someone who had described her last treatment as brutal. There was one Sunday dinner where she seemed almost happy in a way that felt off, not the brave happiness of someone fighting something real but a lighter thing, a relieved thing, like someone who had just been told good news. I thought, maybe she had a good week. I thought, people with cancer have good weeks. I told myself I was being uncharitable. I told myself that doubting her was a form of betrayal. That's the trap in this kind of lie. The more you love someone, the more you police your own suspicion. Every doubt feels like a moral failure. Every moment of skepticism feels like abandonment. She knew that. She had to have known that. She used our love as the mechanism. She knew we would rather doubt ourselves than doubt her. My relationship with my partner, James, took damage I could see in real time and felt powerless to stop. He was patient, genuinely patient, but there are only so many cancelled evenings and distracted conversations and emotional absences before a relationship starts to hollow out. We started arguing about small things in the way that couples argue when the real issue is too large and complicated to address directly. He tried to tell me once, gently, that he was worried about how much I was carrying, and I heard it as criticism of my dedication to my sister, and I pulled away from him in a way that took months to recover from. That's time and closeness we don't get back. The hospital waiting room where everything collapsed was not for Layla. It was for my mother. My mother had a cardiac event in October. Stress-related, her doctor said carefully, without elaborating. She was stable. She was going to be fine. But she spent 2 nights in the hospital, and my father and I sat in that waiting room taking turns trying to sleep, and the whole time Layla was there too, crying, being held, being comforted. Being, I realize now, in the place she felt most comfortable. At the center of a crisis. Receiving. I looked at her across that waiting room at one point, and she was leaning against the wall with her eyes closed, and I thought, even now, even sick as she is, she came. And I loved her for it. I was grateful to her. And then my phone buzzed. The doctor's office. The routine appointment text. The name of a physician I had never heard her mention. The condition listed: sinusitis, chronic sinusitis, no cancer, no lymphoma, no stage anything, just sinusitis. I sat with that text for 40 minutes before I moved. I looked up the physician's office. Real practice, real doctor. I texted the number back and asked carefully about the appointment and what it was regarding, and they confirmed it, a follow-up for a sinus issue, and gave me a date from 6 months earlier when Layla was supposedly in the middle of her second round of treatment. I put my phone face down on my knee. I looked at my mother asleep in the chair next to me, my mother who was in this hospital because of stress, because of fear, because of 7 months of terror that her daughter was dying. My mother who had cried in my car more times than I could count. Who had reorganized her entire life. Who had driven to that medical building and waited in the parking lot and come home and made Layla soup and sat with her fear quietly and alone because she didn't want to burden the rest of us with how scared she was. I looked at Layla at the end of the row of chairs, still leaning against the wall, eyes closed. I felt something go cold in me that I don't think has fully warmed back up since. I didn't say anything that night. My mother was in a hospital bed. My father was exhausted. The timing was impossible. I sat with what I knew and I waited, and it was the longest night of my life, longer even than what came after, because I was alone with the knowledge and it was too big and too wrong for one person to hold. In the morning, when my mother was stable and my father had finally dozed off, I walked to where Layla was standing by the coffee machine and I said, quietly, without any warm-up, "Tell me the name of your oncologist." She looked at me. And in that look, in the half-second before she answered, I saw it. The recalibration. The reaching. I saw her searching for the name she had given me months ago, and I watched her find it and say it, smoothly, naturally, with just the right amount of tiredness in her voice. I said, "That's not who your doctor's office called me about." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. She didn't confess immediately. That's the part people don't expect when I tell this story. They imagine a dramatic breakdown, tears, the truth pouring out in a flood of remorse. What actually happened was worse. She looked at me in that hospital hallway and she tried to construct an explanation. She talked about second opinions and additional doctors and getting care from multiple places. She used medical language that sounded right but meant nothing. She kept her voice at the exact register of someone being misunderstood rather than exposed, and for approximately 90 seconds I watched my sister try to build a new layer of lie on top of the one I had just excavated. I said, "Stop. Just stop." And she stopped. And then she cried. And I stood there and watched her cry and felt absolutely nothing, which frightened me more than any other moment in this entire thing, because I am someone who has cried at commercials, who cries at other people's graduation photos, who cried the day Layla told us she was sick. And I stood in that hallway and watched my sister cry and felt nothing at all. That's what betrayal at that scale does to you. It doesn't make you angry first. It hollows you out first. I told my father that day. Not my mother. Not yet. My mother was still in a hospital bed, and I was not going to walk into that room and hand her this on top of everything else. I told my father in the parking garage while he was trying to find his keys, and he stopped moving when I said the words, and he stood there with his keys in his hand for a long time without saying anything. My father, who had been a strong and steady presence my entire life, looked suddenly like a man who had aged a decade in a minute. He said, very quietly, "Are you sure?" I showed him the texts. I showed him the research I had done overnight. He looked at it. He handed my phone back. He said, "Okay," in a voice that meant nothing was okay and everything had changed. We told my mother 3 days after she came home from the hospital. We waited until her doctor confirmed it was safe to have a difficult conversation. We sat with her in the living room, the same living room where Layla had cried and been held and been believed, and we told her. My mother listened without interrupting, which is not something she normally does. She is a woman who asks questions, who interjects, who processes out loud. She sat through the entire explanation in complete silence, and when we finished she looked at the window for a long moment and then she said, "I need to lie down." And she went upstairs. And she didn't come back down for dinner. That was the beginning of what I can only describe as a fracture that ran through the foundation of our family and has never fully closed. Layla was not in the house for that conversation. She was not welcome. My father had spoken to her the night before, a conversation I was not present for and that he has never fully described to me, and she had not come back. She called me twice while I was sitting with my mother. I declined both calls. She texted something long and searching that I read once and did not respond to. She needed something from me, even then, some response, some engagement, some proof that the connection was still there and could be worked with. I didn't have anything left to give her. The story got out the way stories in families always get out. Incrementally, unstoppably, through cousins and aunts and the extended network of people who had been praying for her, who had sent cards, who had offered meals. My aunt, my mother's sister, had organized a meal train. Actual people had signed up and cooked and delivered food to my parents' house for weeks. Women my mother had known for 30 years had gone out of their way, taken time from their own lives, to help a family they thought was managing a dying member. When they found out, the wave of it came back to us in calls and messages that my mother had to handle while she was still processing her own devastation. She had to answer for something that had been done to her. That is a particular cruelty I still feel heat around. Layla's explanation, when it finally came in a long letter that arrived about 3 weeks after everything collapsed, was something I have read many times trying to find the part where it makes sense. She wrote about feeling invisible. She wrote about watching our lives move forward while she felt stuck. She wrote about how the diagnosis, when she first said it out loud, generated a response from us that she had been craving for years without knowing how to ask for it. She wrote that she had not intended it to go on so long, that she kept trying to find a way out and couldn't, that every week she told herself she would tell the truth and every week the telling felt more impossible than continuing. She wrote that she was sorry. She wrote that word many times. It appeared 11 times in the letter. I counted. I understood the letter. That's the thing I don't know how to explain to people. I could follow the psychology. I could see how someone with her history and her particular hungers had arrived at that decision and then stayed inside it. Understanding it didn't make it smaller. Understanding the mechanism of a bomb doesn't repair with the bomb destroyed. My mother started therapy. She had never been in therapy before in her life, had always had a particular pride about managing things within the family, and she started going twice a week because she needed somewhere to put what was happening to her that wasn't on me or my father. Her therapist, from what my mother has carefully described in our conversations, has been helping her work through a grief that has no clean category. She didn't lose a daughter to death. She lost a version of her daughter she thought she knew. She is mourning someone who is still alive and still calling and still, on some level, wanting to come back. That kind of grief doesn't come with a roadmap. My father didn't go to therapy. He handled it the way men of his generation often handle things, by going quiet and continuing to function. He went to work. He came home. He was kind to my mother. He was civil to me. He did not speak about Layla for several months. When he did, finally, it was a single sentence. We were doing dishes after a Sunday dinner, just the two of us, and he said, without looking up from the sink, "I don't know who she is." And then he kept washing. And I didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. I know who she is. That's my burden. I know who she is and I know who she was and I know the distance between those two things and I know that she built that distance herself over the course of 7 months with precise, deliberate choices made over and over again. Every morning she woke up and continued the lie was a choice. Every time my mother drove her to a medical building was a choice she allowed. Every meal that arrived at my parents' door from a neighbor who thought they were helping a family in crisis was a choice she made by not stopping. The scale of it is what keeps me up at night. Not the origin, the scale. James and I made it through. That is one of the small mercies in this story. We made it through mostly because he was patient in a way that exceeded what I deserved given how absent I had been, and because when everything came out he didn't say "I told you so," even though he had expressed unease about some of Layla's behavior in ways I had dismissed. He just held me while I cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry the whole time it was happening. I had been so busy holding my family together that I hadn't processed any of my own grief, and when it finally came, it came all at once, and it was not pretty, and he stayed through all of it. I have not forgiven Layla. I want to say that clearly because I think people expect a softening at the end of a story like this, and I'm not able to give one. Forgiveness might come. I've been told it's for me, not for her, and I believe the people who say that, and I'm working toward it in the way you work towards something that feels very far away. What I have is understanding without absolution. I understand what she did and why she did it, and it still sits in me like something broken that healed wrong. She is getting help now. Real help. A therapist who specializes in the kind of disorder that drives this kind of behavior. She calls my mother every week and my mother answers, not warmly, but she answers. She has not called my father and I think she understands that the line there is longer and she is still at the beginning of it. She sent me a birthday message in the spring that I did not respond to. Not out of spite. I just didn't know what to say. I still don't. What do you say to someone who borrowed your worst fear, who took the thing your family is most afraid of, death, losing each other, watching someone you love suffer, and used it as a costume? What do you say to someone who stood in the wreckage of your mother's peace of mind and your father's health and your relationship and your own sense of safety inside your family and said, "This, I'll use this"? I don't have words for that yet. Maybe I will someday. The family we are now is functional. We gather for holidays. We cook together. We laugh sometimes. But there is a carefulness in us now that was not there before. A small, constant checking. A habit of verification that feels like a betrayal of what family is supposed to mean and that I cannot turn off. When someone tells me something is wrong now, I feel the pull of two opposite things at once, the love that wants to rush toward them and the scar tissue that says, "Wait, make sure, check." I hate that she gave me that reflex. I hate that I needed to develop it. I hate that my mother has it now too, and my father, and that we all sit together in rooms and love each other carefully where we used to just love each other. She didn't just take 7 months. She took the ease. That's what nobody tells you about betrayal of this specific kind. It doesn't just cost you the lost time and the spent energy and the real health consequences and the relationships that took damage and the strangers who cooked meals for a crisis that didn't exist. It costs you the uncomplicated version of the people you love. It costs you the clean instinct to believe. You get those things back with work, partially, slowly, incompletely. But you pay for them now in ways you never had to before. My sister is alive. She is getting help. She is, by all accounts, genuinely trying to understand what she did and rebuild something from it. And my mother still wakes up some mornings and has to remind herself, before she is fully conscious, that her daughter was never dying. That she chose to make us believe she was. That all of it, every tear and every drive to a medical building and every meal delivered by a neighbor and every night of broken sleep and every spike in my father's blood pressure and every hollow, terrible moment we sat with the idea of losing her, was built out of nothing but need dressed up as catastrophe. She was never dying. But something in us did.